Beneath the glittering tapestries of Tudor courts and the imposing stone walls of noble estates, a vast and bustling world thrived, one largely unseen and unheard. This was the world of servants. The hands that prepared sumptuous feasts, the voices that carried whispered orders through shadowed corridors, and the tireless feet that kept the wheels of aristocratic life turning. Though history often casts its spotlight on kings, queens, and courtiers, it is within the hidden lives of these servants that we find a vital thread weaving together the fabric of Tudor society. Their stories, once overlooked and forgotten, reveal a rich tapestry of resilience, ambition, and everyday drama. Stories that bring us closer to the real heart of an era defined by power, change, and human complexity. Between 1485 and 1603, England underwent a series of profound transformations under the rule of the Tudor dynasty. This period, bookended by the ascension of Henry VII and the death of Elizabeth I, is often remembered for its striking personalities. Monarchs like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, and for the monumental shifts in politics, religion, and international relations. However, beyond the glittering courts and dramatic events, there existed a quieter, largely invisible population whose lives formed the bedrock of Tudor society: the servants. These individuals, ranging from cooks and maids to stewards and grooms, sustained the households of both royalty and commoners. Though indispensable to the functioning of everyday life, their stories have too often been overlooked, consigned to the margins of history. In the backdrop of sweeping political change, the Reformation, the dissolution of the monasteries, and England's emergence as a naval power, the domestic realm remained a constant arena of activity. While kings and queens dominated the national narrative, thousands of men and women labored in kitchens, gardens, stables, and bedchambers. Their efforts maintained the rhythm of Tudor life, supporting not only the aristocracy, but also the emerging merchant class and urban elite. Despite their critical roles, these servants rarely appear in history textbooks, and when they do, it is usually as nameless figures performing menial tasks. This study seeks to uncover the hidden lives of these individuals, to give voice to the voiceless, and restore a sense of dignity and agency to those long passed over by historians. Understanding the daily lives of Tudor servants opens a window into the broader social structures of early modern England. Service was not merely a job, it was a way of life, a stepping stone, and at times a trap. It offered access to food, shelter, and patronage, and occasionally allowed for upward mobility. Conversely, it could also mean vulnerability, exploitation, and invisibility. Studying how these individuals lived, worked, and related to their masters and each other allows us to better grasp the nuances of class, gender, and power during this pivotal era. It brings into focus the social contracts that govern domestic life, the expectations of behavior and loyalty, and the ever-present tension between dependence and autonomy. Moreover, the servant-master relationship in the Tudor period was not simply one of dominance and submission. It was complex, dynamic, and deeply personal. Servants often lived in close proximity to their employers, developing intricate social ties that ranged from affection and trust to resentment and fear. These relationships could shift rapidly, influenced by personal conduct, family alliances, or changes in political fortune. In noble and royal households, a trusted servant might hold significant influence, acting as a confidant or gatekeeper. In humbler homes, a single servant might be expected to perform a multitude of tasks, balancing hard labor with discretion and obedience. Exploring these relationships in their full context reveals the emotional and psychological realities that define daily existence in Tudor England. To reconstruct these lives, one must turn to the fragmentary but rich sources left behind. Although few servants left behind written records of their own, their presence can be traced through a variety of documents. Household accounts, for example, list payments for wages, livery, or clothing, and sometimes note punishments or bonuses. Wills might mention a loyal maid or a long-serving steward, granting them a token of gratitude or continued employment. Parish records, tax rolls, and court documents can yield names, occupations, and living arrangements. Letters written by nobles and gentry occasionally mention servants, particularly when they misbehaved or distinguished themselves. Inventories taken at the time of death can also suggest the physical space servants occupied and the tools they used. Through careful reading and contextual interpretation, these sources allow historians to piece together a mosaic of servant life. This approach requires attentiveness not only to what is said, but also to what is omitted. The absence of servants from certain records may itself be telling, reflecting assumptions about their status or value. The invisibility of women in these texts is particularly striking and demands a gendered lens to discern their roles in domestic labor, child-rearing, and household management. Likewise, the language of the records, formal, impersonal, and often dismissive, must be read critically. Behind the sterile entries lies a world of lived experience. The clatter of pots, the whispered rumors, the weariness of feet after a long day, the small triumphs and quiet humiliations of those who worked from sunrise to dusk. This exploration is not intended to romanticize servitude or suggest a uniform experience. Servant life varied enormously depending on gender, location, employer, and period. Some found opportunity and advancement, others endured hardship and abuse. There were regional differences in expectations and customs, and even religious practices shaped the nature of domestic service. Yet despite these variations, certain common threads emerge. The demanding physical labor, the negotiation of status, the subtle assertion of identity and pride within narrow confines. Ultimately, uncovering the lives of Tudor servants challenges us to broaden our understanding of history. It reminds us that the past was not made only by kings and queens, but by countless ordinary individuals whose names are barely remembered. These servants were not passive background figures, but active participants in the shaping of early modern society. Their labor enabled the extravagance of the court, the comfort of the manor, and the rise of new economic systems. By restoring their stories, we gain a fuller, more honest portrait of the Tudor world. A world marked not only by grandeur and power, but also by sweat, service, and silent resilience. In Tudor England, power was not just expressed in palaces, crowns, and proclamations. It was also enacted daily through the structure and rituals of the household. The Tudor household was more than a place of residence. It was a living institution, a political arena, and a stage on which status and loyalty were continually negotiated. At the apex of this system stood the royal household, an immense operation that mirrored the hierarchy and discipline of the monarchy itself. Beneath it, noble estates spread across the realm, each with its own miniature court of retainers and servants, operating under the royal household during the reigns of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I was one of the largest and most complex organizations in the kingdom. It was a government in microcosm, with departments for everything from food preparation to bedchamber service, financial administration to ceremonial duties. Henry VIII's household, at its height, employed hundreds of people. Some estimates suggest over 1,000 when including part-time workers, musicians, guards, and visiting courtiers. His court was mobile, shifting from palace to palace as the king pursued politics, pleasure, or hunting. Wherever the monarch went, the household followed, transporting not just clothing and tapestries but also kitchens, tents, and even furniture. This mobility required extraordinary logistical planning and a tightly organized hierarchy of servants and officials, many of whom held their posts for life. Service in the royal household was not merely domestic, it was inherently political. Proximity to the monarch meant influence, and even seemingly low-ranking positions could confer power. For instance, the groom of the stool, a servant tasked with attending to the king's private toileting needs, wielded significant access and trust. Such intimacy could translate into political leverage, favors, or the ability to influence decisions indirectly. During Elizabeth I's reign, access to the queen was even more tightly controlled, and her female attendants, especially her ladies of the bedchamber, played essential roles in court politics. These women, while technically servants, could shape the flow of information and secure patronage for themselves or their families. The line between servant and courtier blurred, particularly at higher levels of the household, where loyalty and discretion were rewarded with lands, titles, or royal favor. Beneath the glamour of court life, however, lay the labor of countless lesser-known individuals. Cooks, laundresses, grooms, and porters toiled to keep the machinery of monarchy running. Their days were governed by precise routines, and their conduct by strict rules. Although they held no political sway, their work was indispensable. The daily rituals of dining, dressing, entertaining, and traveling required seamless coordination, with each servant knowing their place and duty. In a society obsessed with hierarchy and order, even the serving of a dish followed a rigid protocol. Servants were expected to uphold the dignity of the court, and infractions, be they drunkenness, theft, or insolence, could result in dismissal, whipping, or worse. Outside the royal household, the great noble estates of Tudor England functioned as miniature kingdoms. These estates, such as those belonging to the Dukes of Norfolk, Northumberland, or the Earl of Leicester, had sprawling staffs that sometimes numbered in the hundreds. They included indoor servants like stewards, butlers, and maids, as well as outdoor workers such as gardeners, huntsmen, and carters. Some families, like the Howards or the Cecils, maintained multiple residences, each requiring its own team of loyal retainers. Noblemen relied on these estates not only to display wealth, but also to administer justice, collect rents, and maintain their political relevance. Their households reflected the social order of the time, reinforcing their status at the top of the social pyramid while providing employment and subsistence to a wide array of servants and laborers. Life in a noble household was governed by household ordinances, written rules that codified everything from meal times to personal behavior. These documents, which survive in various forms in archival collections, provide invaluable insight into the expectations placed on servants. They laid out where each servant was to sleep, how much food they were allotted, and what wages or liveries they would receive. For example, in a typical ordinance, the steward might be instructed to oversee provisions and discipline, the cook to prepare meals according to the dietary requirements of the family, and the laundry maid to wash and return clothes in a timely fashion. Servants were expected to show respect, avoid gossip, abstain from drunkenness, and above all, maintain loyalty to their employer. A breach of conduct could not only lead to dismissal, but could also damage a servant's reputation, making future employment difficult. The structure of these households was hierarchical, with senior servants like the steward, chamberlain, or comptroller overseeing departments and relaying orders from the master or mistress. Below them were ranks of increasingly junior positions. This structure mirrored the feudal ideals that still persisted in Tudor England, even as society began to modernize. Loyalty to one's lord or lady was paramount, and for many, service was a lifelong occupation. Some servants were born into service, following their parents' footsteps in the same household. Others might enter as teenagers and, through good conduct and experience, rise to more senior posts. Promotion was possible, but not guaranteed, and was often influenced by family connections or the personal favor of one's employer. Despite the formality of the structure, households could be surprisingly fluid. Noble families might expand their staff during a major event, such as a wedding or royal visit, or reduce it during times of financial hardship. Temporary servants, such as musicians or cooks hired for a feast, would come and go. Others might be brought in from London or the surrounding countryside, sometimes through recommendation, other times through desperation. The turnover created opportunities for newcomers, but also instability, especially in less prestigious roles. Trust was a crucial currency in these environments, and a servant who proved reliable might be retained for decades, sometimes rewarded in wills or given pensions. For servants, life within these households offered both opportunity and constraint. On one hand, employment in a wealthy or noble house provided food, lodging, clothing, and the potential for advancement. It might even open the door to a better marriage, a small plot of land, or a permanent position of modest comfort. On the other hand, it meant long hours, strict discipline, and limited privacy. Servants were always under observation, judged not only by their work but also by their manners, speech, and associations. They were expected to embody the values and reputation of the household, functioning almost as extensions of their master's will. The presence of household ordinances reveals how seriously Tudor society took the matter of household governance. These rules served to reinforce social order, ensure cleanliness and decorum, and prevent conflict. They were a way to assert authority over both the physical space and the people within it. In times of crisis, plague outbreaks, harvest failures, or political unrest, the household rules might become even stricter as fear of disorder heightened. The enforcement of these ordinances often fell to senior servants, who were themselves bound by loyalty and obligation. They walked a delicate line, balancing the expectations of their masters with the needs and grievances of those under them. In both royal and noble households, the concept of service was imbued with deeper cultural meaning. To serve was to be part of something larger, to participate in the maintenance of an idealized social order. Service implied humility, loyalty, and submission, but also dedication, trust, and craft. For those at the upper levels of the household, it could be a career marked by achievement and respect. For those at the bottom, it might mean anonymity and hard labor. Yet even the lowest scullery maid contributed to the daily running of one of the most important social units of the time. These households, while rooted in tradition, were also evolving. The Tudor period saw significant changes in household management, influenced by shifts in wealth, the rise of the merchant class, and changes in political administration. More families began to adopt elements of the royal model, with larger staffs and more elaborate rituals. At the same time, the increasing availability of printed books, including household manuals, allowed for a standardization of practice and expectation. What had once been passed down orally or through apprenticeship now became codified in print. The power of the Tudor household lay not just in its wealth or its size, but in its ability to organize, display, and reproduce authority. It was a site where the daily realities of power were enacted, through service, supervision, and ceremony. Whether at Hampton Court or a country manor in Yorkshire, the household served as the engine of elite life, fueled by the labor of servants who worked largely unseen, but whose efforts kept the machinery of society in motion. By understanding the structure and rules of these households, we can begin to see how power was maintained not only through laws and armies, but through habits, routines, and relationships within the walls of the home. In Tudor England, the structure of a household, whether royal, noble, or even middling, depended heavily on the labor of a broad variety of servants. These individuals were not a homogeneous group, but occupied distinct roles defined by gender, skill, and status. From the young boy turning a spit in the kitchen to the trusted steward managing the entire estate, each position came with its own expectations, opportunities, and limitations. The day-to-day running of a household was a complex symphony of specialized labor, and understanding the diversity within servant roles sheds light on the values, hierarchies, and functions of Tudor society. Men and women in service often worked in sharply divided spheres. Male servants typically held positions that required physical strength, mobility, or administrative oversight. Among the most visible were footmen, young and agile men whose duties included running errands, carrying messages, and accompanying carriages or riders on journeys. They were selected not only for their endurance, but also for their appearance, as they often represented the public face of the household during travels or public events. Grooms took care of horses in stables, a physically demanding role requiring both practical skill and reliability. Inside the home, male cooks operated in the kitchens, sometimes overseeing a staff of assistants, though women often worked alongside them in roles such as scullery maids or helpers. Women, by contrast, were generally found in domestic and personal care roles. Maids worked in different capacities. Some were chambermaids responsible for cleaning rooms, others might serve as nursemaids to children, or as ladies' maids attending to the personal needs of noble women. Their duties ranged from making beds and sewing clothes to helping their mistresses dress and maintain appearances. Cooks in female roles usually managed the preparation of simpler meals, confections, or dairy products, and in some cases oversaw the household pantry. Laundresses, often working outside the immediate household quarters, bore the brunt of physically demanding labor, scrubbing, rinsing, and drying heavy linens and garments regardless of season or weather. Beyond these general roles, Tudor households also relied on specialized servants whose functions reflected the wealth, interests, and status of their employers. One such example is the spit boy, often a young boy or adolescent, whose entire task was to turn the spit over the open fire for hours at a time. This job was exhausting, dangerous, and low in prestige, yet vital to the household's dining arrangements. The intense heat and repetitive motion could leave permanent injuries or scars, and the position symbolized the lowest rung on the domestic ladder. On the more prestigious end of the spectrum were roles like the steward, who managed the estate's financial and logistical matters. The steward was the master's proxy, ensuring that all parts of the household, from servants' conduct to inventory control, ran smoothly. He kept accounts, directed purchases, and handled grievances, sometimes acting as a magistrate on behalf of the landowning family. This was a trusted, high-ranking role, typically occupied by a man of literacy, discretion, and long-standing loyalty. Some servants were tied to the leisure and culture of the household. The falconer, responsible for caring for and training birds of prey used in hunting, was a skilled specialist and held in high regard. In noble or royal circles, hunting was a symbol of power and sophistication, and the falconer's ability to manage this sport was seen as essential. Similarly, the fool, a figure of entertainment and satire, occupied a peculiar and ambiguous place in the household. Though ostensibly a jester, the fool could often speak truths veiled in humor and sometimes enjoyed remarkable closeness with their employers. Their protected status allowed them to flout certain conventions, but this license was conditional and could be withdrawn at any moment. The lady's maid, another specialized role, was responsible for a noblewoman's personal grooming, wardrobe, and often emotional support. Unlike other maids, she might be entrusted with secrets or private matters and expected to travel with her mistress. Her proximity to power did not guarantee autonomy, but it did allow her a higher standard of dress, better quarters, and more varied experiences than her lower-ranking counterparts. Not all roles were defined purely by physical tasks. Some servants contributed intellectually. Tutors, often male, were hired to educate the children of the household, particularly boys destined for university or legal training. While not always considered servants in the traditional sense, they were part of the domestic structure and depended on the patronage of the household head. These educated men might dine separately and have more freedom of movement, but they still occupied a dependent position within the hierarchy. A servant's career typically followed a particular trajectory, though it was shaped by many variables including gender, skill, luck, and the nature of the household. Many began in service as adolescents. Boys might start as page boys or errand runners, girls as kitchen maids or nursemaids. These early roles demanded energy and submission, but offered little in the way of comfort or recognition. Work was often grueling and repetitive, and discipline could be strict. However, for many young people from poorer families, entering service was a means of survival and a potential gateway to a better life. As servants grew older and gained experience, they could advance to more stable and responsible positions. A kitchen maid might become a cook, a footman might rise to the role of valet or butler, a chambermaid might become a lady's maid. Promotion was not guaranteed and was influenced heavily by the servant's demeanor, reliability, and the patron's goodwill. Opportunities for advancement were often greater in larger households where more roles and turnover allowed for movement. In smaller households, however, the ceiling was much lower, and a servant might remain in the same position for decades. Some servants, especially those who had served a family faithfully for many years, could hope for relative security in old age. A few might be granted a pension, a room on the estate, or a small piece of land to manage. Such rewards depended entirely on the generosity and financial health of the employer. Others, less fortunate, faced dismissal when they were no longer able to fulfill their duties. Old age for a servant without savings or family support could mean poverty or dependence on parish relief. Nonetheless, there are records of wills in which masters and mistresses left generous bequests to longtime servants, clothing, silver spoons, or annual stipends, as a token of appreciation and enduring loyalty. Female servants, in particular, faced unique challenges as they aged. Women who remained in service into middle age might be viewed with suspicion, especially if unmarried. The social value of women was often tied to marriage and childbearing, and older single women could be vulnerable to slander or dismissal. On the other hand, some elder women became indispensable household figures, nursemaids, herbalists, or midwives, whose knowledge and experience were trusted and relied upon. For both men and women, the life of a servant was marked by a continuous negotiation between submission and self-respect. While bound by hierarchy, many servants found ways to assert their dignity, through good work, careful saving, or cultivating influence with their superiors. Bonds between servants could also provide a form of solidarity, though competition and jealousy were common. Friendships formed in the back corridors and kitchens could provide solace in an otherwise demanding life. It's important to recognize that Tudor service was not a static or universal experience. The nature of the role, the employer's disposition, and the location of the household all played crucial parts in shaping a servant's life. Urban households might employ fewer but more specialized servants. Rural manors required flexibility and hard physical labor. Some servants came from families who had served the same lords for generations, creating traditions of loyalty. Others arrived as strangers, seeking employment after a failed harvest or personal misfortune. The domestic workforce of Tudor England was as diverse as it was essential. Servants occupied nearly every conceivable role within a household and were responsible for its operation, maintenance, and representation. Their labor upheld the comfort of their employers, facilitated the display of status, and in many cases created the foundation upon which Tudor society was built. Though they may not have had the freedom or recognition of their masters, They shaped the rhythm of daily life and left behind a legacy that, though often unacknowledged, was central to the world they inhabited. By examining their roles, we move closer to understanding the texture and complexity of a society that was defined as much by its servants as by its rulers. Within the vast world of Tudor domestic service, there existed a detailed and rigid hierarchy among the servants themselves. This internal stratification mirrored the broader societal structure of the time, where every individual had a place and was expected to remain within it. Servants were not a single, indistinguishable class, but instead occupied positions along a continuum of status, responsibility, and privilege. From the steward at the top to the scullery boy at the bottom, each role carried with it certain expectations, limitations, and, in some cases, opportunities for advancement. Understanding this internal order is essential to grasp how Tudor households functioned, not just as places of labor, but as microcosms of the society's deep-rooted obsession with rank and order. At the top of the servant hierarchy stood individuals who operated as extensions of the household's lord or lady. These senior servants, such as the steward, comptroller, or housekeeper, managed entire domains within the estate. The steward, often educated and trusted, handled estate finances, oversaw subordinate staff, and sometimes even managed legal disputes on the master's behalf. Such a role required not just organizational ability, but also diplomacy and discretion. The steward might attend the master at meals, represent the household in local affairs, and supervise hiring and dismissals. His position granted him both authority over other servants and proximity to his employers, making him a powerful figure in his own right. Below these senior officials were the middle ranks, the butler, cook, head groom, and chief maid among others. These individuals had authority within their specific departments and were responsible for managing the tasks and conduct of those under them. The butler, for instance, managed the wine cellar, serving ware, and often controlled access to valuable goods like silver plate and fine linens. Similarly, the head cook was in charge of planning and preparing meals, overseeing the kitchen staff, and ensuring the smooth operation of a complex and vital department. These positions demanded reliability, experience, and trustworthiness, and those who held them often had years of service behind them. The lower tiers of the household were populated by the majority of the servant population: footmen, chambermaids, scullery maids, kitchen boys, and others whose tasks were more physically demanding and less prestigious. These roles were often filled by young people at the beginning of their service careers, expected to work hard, follow orders without question, and prove their loyalty over time. They performed the least desirable duties, cleaning chamber pots, fetching water, scrubbing floors, and enjoyed few comforts or privileges. Yet even among these lower ranks, distinctions existed. A chambermaid who worked in the private quarters of a noblewoman might be seen as more prestigious than a scullery maid who labored unseen in the depths of the kitchen. The ability to rise within the servant ranks was real, though limited and highly contingent on circumstance. Promotion depended largely on the discretion of the employer, the recommendations of senior staff, and the servant's own conduct and capabilities. A diligent kitchen maid could become an assistant cook and eventually rise to head the kitchen staff if she showed skill and initiative. A groom might be promoted to head groom, then to stable master, overseeing the maintenance and breeding of horses for the household. Such advancement was more common in large households with extensive staff, where upward movement was both necessary and possible due to the sheer number of roles. Patronage played a central role in determining a servant's trajectory. A servant who caught the favorable attention of a master or mistress might be rewarded with better assignments, additional privileges, or even external opportunities. For instance, a lady's maid who earned her mistress's trust might be sent to accompany her to court or on travels, gaining exposure and new contacts. Likewise, a young man who impressed the lord of the house might be recommended for a position in a royal or noble household of greater status. These acts of patronage were not merely gifts. They were calculated decisions that reinforced loyalty and secured a servant's devotion. For the servant, such favor could transform a humble role into a stepping stone for lifelong security or advancement. Living conditions reflected and reinforced these internal hierarchies. Senior servants often enjoyed private or semi-private rooms, located closer to the family's quarters or in separate service wings. These rooms were modest but offered relative privacy and comfort: a bed with curtains, a writing desk, and perhaps a small fireplace. Middle-ranking servants typically shared rooms with one or two others and were located within the main structure, but away from the family's immediate living spaces. They had access to better food, warmer quarters, and sometimes a separate servants' dining area where status was carefully observed even at mealtimes. For the lowest-ranking servants, accommodations were far more basic. Many slept in communal dormitories, attics, or even near the kitchens where it was warm, albeit noisy and uncomfortable. Their bedding might be straw pallets or thin mattresses on wooden planks, and personal belongings were limited to what could fit in a small chest or under a bed. Privacy was virtually non-existent, and conditions could be damp, dirty, and cold, especially in winter. Access to food was similarly stratified. The best cuts and freshest items went to the family and their favored attendants, while the lower servants subsisted on leftovers or bulk provisions like pottage, bread, and cheese. Privileges within the servant world also varied according to rank. Higher-ranking servants could wear livery, special clothing provided by the household that signified their connection and loyalty to a particular family. This not only identified them in public, but also conferred a certain pride and protection. They might also receive tips, gifts, or seasonal bonuses in money or kind. In some cases, senior servants were allowed to keep personal servants of their own, especially in very large households where the steward or comptroller wielded significant influence. In contrast, the lower servants had few perks. Their movements were often restricted, their conduct closely monitored, and their free time minimal. Even a small error could result in reprimand, demotion, or dismissal. However, for those who could navigate the internal dynamics and earn favor, life could improve dramatically over time. Stories of servants rising through the ranks, eventually achieving a level of comfort or influence, did exist and served as motivation for many in service. This hierarchy among servants was not static. It could shift with the arrival of a new employer, a change in household fortune, or the internal politics of the servant community itself. Rivalries, alliances, and networks formed behind the scenes, with gossip, loyalties, and quiet competitions playing out alongside the formal duties. In some households, long-standing servants wielded silent authority, their experience and inside knowledge granting them unofficial power even beyond their titles. The servant hierarchy was thus a complex and living structure, a blend of institutional organization and human relationship. It served the practical function of organizing labor and maintaining order, but it also echoed and reinforced the wider Tudor obsession with rank, loyalty, and deference. Within the walls of the great houses of England, servants navigated their own world of ambition, duty, and survival, climbing where they could, enduring where they must, and always aware of where they stood in the invisible but deeply felt order of things. Life in a Tudor household, particularly one belonging to the nobility or gentry, was a carefully structured operation that revolved around a relentless daily schedule. For the servants who kept these homes running, each day began long before the masters and mistresses stirred and ended well after the household had settled into sleep. The rhythm of their day was dictated not by personal preference, but by duty, hierarchy, and the demands of the household. These homes were not only places of residence, they were centers of administration, social life, and display. As such, the machinery that kept them functioning required tireless effort, strict discipline, and an intricate coordination of labor, most of which unfolded behind the scenes, performed by individuals whose names rarely appeared in the historical record. The first stirrings in the servant quarters began before sunrise. In the winter months, this could mean waking in near darkness, guided only by candlelight or the dim glow of embers left in the hearth. In the summer, dawn came earlier, and the morning tasks began accordingly. The earliest to rise were often the kitchen staff and scullery workers, along with grooms and stable boys. Their work was vital to setting the tone for the day. The scullery maid's first task might be to rekindle the kitchen fires, removing ashes from the previous day and laying fresh kindling. Without fire, no cooking or boiling could begin, and in the Tudor household, meals were not merely nourishment but important expressions of wealth and refinement. While the kitchen fires were being revived, the grooms made their way to the stables. They checked on the horses, ensured they had hay and water, and began cleaning out the stalls. If the family planned to travel or if visitors were expected, the horses had to be groomed and prepared early. The stable yard was a scene of vigorous activity, often involving more than just maintenance. Supplies might be fetched from town, carts readied, or goods delivered. Within the house itself, cleaning began almost immediately. Chambermaids and underservants made their way through corridors and rooms, collecting chamber pots, sweeping rushes, and airing out bedding. Bedding might be shaken out of windows to release dust and moisture, and linens would be assessed for washing. Since laundering was a strenuous and time-consuming task, it was often done weekly rather than daily, but the daily tidying of rooms was essential. Floors were swept, surfaces dusted, and in wealthier homes, tapestries and hangings checked for signs of damp or pests. As these tasks progressed, the cook and her assistants began preparing the first meal of the day. Breakfast in noble households was generally simpler than later meals, but still required careful preparation. Bread, ale, perhaps a pottage or small meat dish for those of higher rank. Everything had to be timed precisely, so that the food was warm and ready at the appointed time. Food preparation was not only about cooking. It involved fetching ingredients from storerooms, selecting the best cuts, and overseeing the presentation. In wealthier households, food was often served with ceremonial attention to order and decorum, meaning that even the simplest dish carried the burden of aesthetic as well as practical expectations. Servants had to be in constant motion, running errands, delivering messages, and attending to the needs of their superiors. A footman might be sent to summon a guest, a maid dispatched to fetch a garment or repair a tear, a page sent to the local town for news or goods. These errands could range from brief trips within the estate to longer journeys that kept a servant away for the better part of a day. The life of an errand runner was exhausting and exposed them to both the weather and the unpredictable demands of the wider world beyond the household walls. One of the most striking features of daily life in these households was the deeply gendered nature of labor. Tasks were divided not only by skill or experience, but also by expectations of what was appropriate for men and women. Male servants, particularly those in the upper levels of household service, often held administrative or supervisory roles. They acted as valets, stewards, or butlers and were responsible for everything from managing supplies to overseeing wine cellars or maintaining household accounts. Physical labor, too, was largely the domain of men, carrying firewood, drawing water, carting goods from market, or maintaining the grounds and outbuildings. Female servants, by contrast, were generally confined to the interior and focused on personal, domestic, or care-based labor. They cleaned, sewed, cooked, washed, and attended to the needs of the lady of the house and her children. While their roles were essential, they were also constrained by social convention. A maid would not be expected to saddle a horse, just as a groom would not be expected to wash linen. This rigid division often left women doing the dirtiest and most repetitive work. The laundress, for example, might spend hours kneeling at the riverbank or hauling buckets of water, scrubbing heavy cloth with lye, and hanging it to dry in all weather. Midday brought the main meal for most of the household. The family and guests dined in the great hall or private chambers, depending on formality and status. Senior servants might serve at the table, presenting dishes with bows and performing subtle rituals of courtesy. Their uniforms or livery indicated their position and reflected on the household's prestige. Lower-ranking servants typically ate afterward and separately, often in the kitchen or servants' hall. Their food was less refined, often the remnants of the family's meal, and eaten quickly before they returned to their duties. Afternoons brought a continuation of the morning's labor. Clothes needed mending, letters needed copying, furniture needed dusting, and visitors needed attending. If there were preparations for an evening meal or entertainment, work intensified again. Servants rehearsed the steps of service, ensured candles were trimmed, fireplaces restoked, and rooms arranged for guests. In noble houses that hosted frequent gatherings, the entire household had to shift gears quickly, creating an air of grandeur and ease that belied the frenzy of preparation behind the scenes. By dusk, as the household settled for the night, the servants' duties were far from over. Fires had to be banked, doors locked, and the premises secured. Bedchambers had to be made ready, nightclothes laid out, basins filled with water for washing. Upper servants might remain alert in case their masters required anything late in the evening, while others finally withdrew to their own quarters, often exhausted and sore. Even in their rest, they were subject to rules: no loud talking, no visitors, and always ready to respond to a call if needed. The wear and tear of these daily routines was immense. There were no days off in the modern sense. Religious festivals might offer some respite, but even then, many servants remained on duty to prepare for feasting or ceremony. The labor was constant, often invisible, and rarely rewarded beyond the provision of food, clothing, and shelter. For some, the work offered a path to stability, even advancement. For others, it was a lifelong sentence of subordination and drudgery. Yet within this routine, there was also a rhythm that created a sense of purpose. The repetition of tasks, the shared responsibility, and the intricate choreography of movement gave the servants' world a structure that, while strict, was not without its own form of pride. Knowing one's role and fulfilling it well could earn respect among peers and favor from superiors. The pride of a well-laid table, a flawlessly executed banquet, or an immaculately kept room provided small but meaningful rewards. The day in a Tudor household, from dawn to dusk, was a performance of duty, order, and tradition. Beneath the polished surface that visitors saw, an entire army of laborers worked tirelessly to uphold the illusion of effortless nobility. Their work might be hidden, but it was essential. Each hour was filled with activities shaped by centuries of custom and expectation, carried out by individuals whose lives, though often uncelebrated, were fundamental to the society they served. Life inside a grand Tudor household was marked by ritual, performance, and opulence, but behind this facade of splendor was a ceaseless grind of labor carried out by the servants whose work made such luxury possible. Much of this work happened far from the eyes of the family or their guests, in the lower kitchens, in outbuildings, in the laundry yard, or deep in the cellars and storerooms. The hustle of this hidden workforce was what allowed Tudor society's elite to present themselves with elegance and ceremony. These tasks, mundane yet vital, ranged from preparing meals in vast and smoky kitchens, to caring for wardrobes filled with elaborate clothing, to tending animals, hauling water, and managing the invisible backbone of domestic life. Perhaps the most physically intense and logistically complicated part of the servant's world took place in the kitchen. Cooking in the Tudor period was a demanding craft, combining culinary skill with physical stamina and the ability to work under extreme pressure. The kitchens in noble and gentry households were large, sometimes sprawling spaces filled with heat, noise, and bustle. They were equipped with enormous hearths, cauldrons, roasting spits, pastry ovens, and various iron tools. Cooking was done over open flames, which meant not only mastering heat control, but also enduring high temperatures, burns, smoke inhalation, and constant risk of fire. The daily menus could be elaborate, with dozens of dishes requiring precise coordination. Tudor recipes were not standardized like modern ones. They offered general instructions and assumed a high level of knowledge. Dishes included spiced meats, pottages, jellies, pies, and elaborate sugar work, particularly for feasts and special occasions. Preparing these meals required careful planning and multiple hands. The spit boy, often one of the youngest and lowest-ranking kitchen workers, spent hours turning meat on the spit to ensure even cooking, an exhausting and monotonous task performed close to blazing heat. Cooks had to balance flavor, presentation, and timing, all without the benefit of refrigeration or modern sanitation. Many ingredients required laborious preparation. Meat had to be butchered, fish gutted, herbs ground with mortar and pestle, and flour sifted. Bread was often baked in-house, involving early morning mixing, kneading, and proofing. Even the most routine meal could involve dozens of individual tasks, each one carried out by a servant working under the watchful eye of a head cook. Errors were costly, and poor execution could reflect poorly on the household's reputation. Alongside food preparation was the equally unending labor of managing laundry and maintaining textiles. Washing clothes and linens in the Tudor period was a Herculean task. There were no soaps in the modern sense, but rather lye, a caustic substance made from wood ash, used to break down dirt and grease. Water had to be drawn manually, heated in large cauldrons, and poured into wash tubs. Clothes were scrubbed, beaten, rinsed, and then wrung out, a process that often took a full day or longer. Drying was done outdoors when the weather permitted, or indoors by the fire, which introduced the constant risk of smoke damage or scorching. Once washed and dried, clothes had to be ironed, folded, and stored. Ironing in the Tudor age involved metal irons heated over the fire and used quickly before they cooled. These irons were heavy and unwieldy, and burns were common. Linens such as tablecloths, napkins, and bedclothes required particular attention, especially in households that entertained frequently. Clean, pressed linens were a sign of order and respectability. Wrinkled or soiled ones could be interpreted as signs of neglect or poor management. More specialized servants attended to garments belonging to the lord or lady of the house. These items, gowns, doublets, ruffs, hose, were often made of expensive materials like silk, velvet, or brocade and required delicate handling. Each piece had to be brushed, maintained, and sometimes mended or altered. Ruffs had to be carefully starched and shaped, a task that demanded precision and patience. The wardrobe servant needed not only dexterity with a needle, but also an understanding of fashion, seasonal attire, and how to handle precious textiles. This work often took place in a dedicated wardrobe room or chamber, where garments were catalogued and maintained much like assets in a treasury. While some servants labored indoors, others were tasked with responsibilities outdoors, or in the service areas that connected the household with the surrounding environment. Chief among these were the stable hands, grooms, and those responsible for animal care. In large estates, horses were not merely transportation, they were status symbols. Maintaining them required constant attention. Stables needed daily mucking out, straw replaced, water refreshed, and feed distributed. The horses themselves required grooming, brushing, cleaning hooves, and inspecting for injury or illness. Tack and saddles had to be maintained, oiled, and stored properly. Servants responsible for horses often had a close relationship with their charges, understanding their behaviors and preferences. A well-kept stable reflected positively on the estate, especially if guests arrived on horseback and were greeted with orderly, clean facilities. Some households employed farriers or veterinary assistants, though more often these tasks were handled in-house by experienced grooms. During hunting season or before travel, the pace of work would intensify, with horses needing to be prepared swiftly and safely. Fetching water was another essential and grueling duty that fell largely to the lowest-ranking servants. Tudor homes, even grand ones, often lacked indoor plumbing. Water had to be collected from wells, springs, or nearby rivers and carried in buckets or large pitchers to where it was needed. This chore was constant. Kitchens required water for cooking and cleaning, laundries for washing, and the household in general for drinking, bathing, and sanitation. In winter, the task was made worse by freezing temperatures. In summer, the need for water increased due to the heat and dust. The servants responsible for this work had to navigate long distances, heavy loads, and potentially slippery or treacherous paths. Spilling water or arriving late could result in reprimand. Some homes had cisterns or rudimentary rainwater collection systems, but these were supplementary at best. The repetitive nature of the task, combined with its physical demands, made water fetching one of the least desirable jobs in the household hierarchy. The labor of these behind-the-scenes servants was invisible in the sense that it rarely received recognition, yet it was what allowed Tudor households to function smoothly. Every dish on the table, every clean shirt, every well-groomed horse was the product of hours, sometimes days, of preparation. The servants who performed these tasks developed deep expertise in their specific areas, often passing down knowledge through apprenticeship and repetition rather than formal instruction. Despite the harshness of their conditions, many servants took pride in their roles. The best cooks, laundresses, and grooms were respected within the servant community and sometimes held in esteem by their employers. Their labor might be unseen by dinner guests or overlooked in historical records, but it was acknowledged within the household's internal economy. They were the engine behind the estate's public performance, the silent architects of everyday grandeur. The physical toll of this work should not be underestimated. Burns, sprains, cuts, and long-term fatigue were common. Older servants who had spent decades in kitchens or stables often carried the signs of their labor in their bodies. Some households provided pensions or lighter duties to aging workers, though many simply worked until they could no longer perform their tasks. The cycle of work, though relentless, was shaped by necessity, tradition, and a tacit understanding of mutual dependence. In examining the inner workings of a Tudor household, it becomes clear that the grandeur of elite life rested entirely on the backs of those who labored out of sight. Whether preparing elaborate meals, managing precious garments, or hauling water across the estate, the servant class shaped the rhythm, reputation, and reality of domestic life. Their world may have been hidden, but it was not marginal. It was essential, complex, and profoundly human. Service in Tudor England varied greatly, depending on where it was performed. A servant working on a remote rural estate lived and labored under very different conditions than one employed in a royal palace, bustling urban townhouse, or merchant home in a city like London or Bristol. These differences shaped everything from daily routines and expectations to opportunities for advancement and social mobility. While the core identity of service, obedience, loyalty, and hard work remained consistent, The context in which it unfolded made a significant difference to the experience and prospects of the individuals involved. On a rural estate, life was typically more isolated and hierarchical. The estate operated as a self-contained unit, with most goods produced locally and a relatively fixed population of residents and workers. Servants in such settings often had clearly defined roles and routines shaped by the seasons. Work revolved around agricultural cycles, hunting calendars, and the rhythms of noble life. The community was small, which fostered long-term familiarity among household members, but it could also limit opportunity. Promotion often depended on the goodwill of a master or mistress, and those in service were closely watched and subject to rigid expectations. Privacy was rare, and gossip or missteps could linger long in memory. By contrast, service in royal households or urban environments was more fluid, dynamic, and competitive. The royal court, in particular, was a universe unto itself, a crowded, theatrical space filled with powerful people, elaborate ceremonies, and fierce social jockeying. Servants at court might be involved in everything from dressing the monarch to managing diplomatic guests, preparing banquets, or maintaining the royal stables and wardrobe. Because of the visibility and prestige of these roles, court service offered the potential for patronage and advancement, though it came with intense scrutiny and political danger. Royal service demanded a high level of decorum, skill, and discretion. Many who served the monarch lived within the palace complex and were subject to strict rules laid out in household ordinances. These documents detailed everything from meal schedules to protocols for behavior and clothing. Competition for positions was fierce, and appointments were often based on favor, lineage, or influence rather than merit alone. Still, for those who succeeded in securing a place at court, the rewards could be substantial. Access to gifts, wages, and upward mobility either within the royal household or through connections made with courtiers and nobles. Urban service, particularly in growing cities like London and Bristol, offered yet another kind of experience. These cities were expanding rapidly in the Tudor period, fueled by trade, immigration, and increasing commercial activity. Urban households, especially those belonging to merchants, wealthy tradespeople, or minor gentry, required servants not only for domestic tasks but also for business-related work. Servants in such homes might help with bookkeeping, inventory management, deliveries, or shopkeeping. Unlike on a rural estate, where the boundaries of the household were often fixed and static, urban households were more porous and frequently interacted with the public. Servants might engage directly with customers or suppliers and could gain valuable commercial experience. Inns and taverns represented a unique hybrid of domestic and commercial service. Workers in these establishments needed to serve both as hosts and caretakers, preparing food, managing rooms, handling horses, and dealing with travelers of every social rank. These roles demanded flexibility, a high tolerance for unpredictability, and social skill. Inns in major towns often served as informal centers of information and exchange, and the servants who worked there had access to a constantly changing cast of characters: merchants, soldiers, actors, pilgrims, and officials. This constant flow of people brought exposure to new ideas and opportunities, but also risk, particularly in terms of crime, disease, and moral reputation. In cities, employment conditions were both promising and precarious. On one hand, urban centers offered higher wages, better access to markets, and the possibility of saving enough money to start a small business or marry into a trade family. Servants who gained skills such as literacy, bookkeeping, tailoring, or culinary arts could sometimes transition into more independent roles. Young women in particular, if they served in reputable households, might make advantageous matches or receive help setting up a household of their own. Apprenticeships, while distinct from domestic service, often overlapped in practice, and some servants shifted from one to the other depending on circumstances and connections. On the other hand, city life brought significant risks. Servants were vulnerable to exploitation, especially if they were young, unprotected, or newly arrived from the countryside. There were no standardized labor protections or employment contracts in the modern sense. Conditions could vary widely depending on the employer's character and financial situation. A servant might be dismissed without pay, subjected to overwork or abuse, or forced to work in unhealthy or unsafe conditions. Disease was a constant threat, particularly in overcrowded quarters, and moral danger lurked in the form of brothels, gambling, and crime. For women, accusations of impropriety or theft could destroy a reputation and make finding new work difficult. Living arrangements for urban servants ranged from dormitory-like quarters in large households to cramped attic spaces, or even beds shared in shifts in smaller homes. Food and clothing were often provided as part of employment, but the quality varied. In wealthier households, servants might wear liveries or uniforms that lent status and pride, while poorer establishments might supply only the bare minimum. Still, even modest wages were sometimes enough to allow a servant to send money home, save for a dowry, or support relatives. Mobility between roles was more possible in cities than in the countryside. A scullery maid in a rural estate might spend her entire life in the same position, but her counterpart in a city might move between households, gain new skills, and work her way up to housekeeper or steward. Urban life rewarded adaptability and resilience. Servants learned to navigate a shifting labor market, maintain a good reputation, and cultivate references from former employers. Churches, guilds, and neighborhood networks played a role in job placement and offered some measure of informal protection or support. For many, service in a city or at court was a stepping stone, not an endpoint. The hope, realized for some, was to parlay years of hard work into economic security or even property ownership. Those who succeeded in saving money or marrying well could leave service and enter the ranks of small traders, craftsmen, or even minor landowners. Though rare, these transitions underscore the fact that domestic service was not simply a matter of subordination, but a dynamic part of Tudor economic and social life. Service in royal and urban settings thus represented a broad spectrum of experiences, shaped by geography, household wealth, type of labor, and the servant's own ambition and resourcefulness. Whether carrying water on a noble's country estate or managing accounts in a London merchant's house, Tudor servants formed an essential and complex class, ever adaptable, constantly in motion, and deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. Their labor, often unseen and unrecorded, was indispensable to the functioning of both the private home and the broader society. In Tudor England, the daily lives of servants were shaped by their living conditions, diet, clothing, and social interactions. These aspects varied significantly depending on their roles and the households they served. Servants' accommodations were often modest and functional. In many households, they slept in attic rooms or shared quarters, which were typically cold in winter and hot in summer. Furnishings were basic, and privacy was limited. Male and female servants were usually housed separately, with male staff often lodged in the basement and female staff in the attic. The diet of servants differed markedly from that of their employers. While the gentry enjoyed elaborate meals with multiple courses, servants typically ate simpler fare. In some households, servants dined on leftovers after the family had finished their meals. Their meals were less varied and lacked the richness of the gentry's cuisine. Servants' clothing was practical and often consisted of second-hand garments passed down from their employers. In some cases, they received livery, uniforms provided by the household, which signified their service and role. Clothing was a significant marker of social status, and sumptuary laws regulated what individuals could wear based on their rank. Servants' personal lives were influenced by societal expectations and the nature of their employment. Romantic relationships among servants were common, but marriages often required the consent of employers. While the upper classes arranged marriages for social and economic reasons, lower-class individuals, including servants, had more freedom to choose their partners, although financial stability was a prerequisite for marriage. Servants formed close-knit communities within households, fostering friendships and, at times, rivalries. Gossip was a prevalent aspect of their social interactions, serving both as entertainment and a means of information exchange. These relationships provided emotional support and a sense of camaraderie amidst the demanding nature of their work. Religion played a central role in Tudor society, and servants were expected to participate in religious practices. Attendance at Church of England services was compulsory, and failure to comply could result in penalties. The Reformation brought significant changes to religious practices, affecting the daily lives of all, including servants. The lives of Tudor servants were characterized by modest living conditions, simple diets, practical clothing, and complex social dynamics. Their experiences were shaped by the expectations of their roles and the societal norms of the time. In the Tudor era, life for a servant revolved not only around relentless work and loyalty to their employers, but also around the constant negotiation of economic survival. While these workers were often seen as humble, obedient figures laboring in kitchens, halls, and stables, their relationship with money, material goods, and livelihood was far more complex. A servant's financial life was a precarious balance of official wages, unofficial perks, and personal ingenuity. Though rarely paid enough to afford true comfort, many servants managed to get by, and some even prospered, through a mix of thrift, opportunity, and at times morally ambiguous or outright illegal activity. Wages for servants in Tudor England varied widely depending on rank, location, the wealth of the employer, and the specific role held. At the lower end of the spectrum, a young scullion in a noble household might receive just a few shillings per year, often in addition to food, board, and second-hand clothing. More experienced or specialized servants such as cooks, stewards, or tutors could earn considerably more. Perhaps as much as £2 to £5 per annum, or even higher in exceptional cases. Senior roles such as the steward or chamberlain in a royal or aristocratic household often earned a modest living wage, which could be supplemented with perks. One important factor in servant economies was that wages were not the sole source of income. In fact, they were often considered a minor part of the overall compensation package. Tips from guests, festival bonuses, and perquisites, access to leftover food, candle stubs, worn garments, or broken tools, were highly prized. These small privileges were frequently granted by custom, if not official policy, and could make a noticeable difference in a servant's quality of life. For instance, kitchen workers were usually allowed to take home bones and scraps, which could be used in their own meals or traded with others. Similarly, stable hands might be permitted to collect the dung for use in market gardens or to sell. The giving of gifts and tips, particularly at major feasts such as Christmas or New Year, was another common economic feature. Wealthy families might distribute coins, cast-off clothing, or food parcels to their staff as part of festive traditions. These were often as much about reinforcing hierarchical loyalty and paternalistic benevolence as they were about financial reward. Still, servants looked forward to these occasions, which could represent the largest influx of material goods they received all year. Beyond such direct earnings and allowances, an informal economy thrived among Tudor servants. Barter was a central feature of daily life, especially in rural estates where currency was scarce. A maid might trade a strip of ribbon for a pair of eggs, or a cook might offer ale in exchange for a chicken. These exchanges created a complex web of dependencies and obligations within the servant community, and while largely unofficial, they were essential to household life. Another shadowy aspect of servant economics was theft. Temptations abounded in the homes of the wealthy: silver spoons, bolts of cloth, spices, or coins carelessly left in pockets. Most thefts were small and opportunistic rather than planned, and often driven by necessity rather than greed. Servants who stole might do so in hopes of buying medicine for a relative, paying a debt, or simply surviving a lean winter. Employers were well aware of the risks, and strict inventories were often kept to discourage dishonesty. Moonlighting was yet another means by which servants supplemented their income. In cities especially, some took on extra work in the evenings or on holy days, which were nominally days of rest. A laundress might clean linens for neighbors, a footman might run errands for merchants, or a stable boy might rent out his grooming services. While not always approved by employers, these side ventures were often tolerated as long as they did not interfere with primary duties. For many, this was the only way to accumulate savings or support dependents. Saving was difficult but not impossible. A frugal servant could squirrel away small sums over time, especially if they avoided temptation and misfortune. Some used parish guilds or informal community groups to pool savings and provide mutual support in times of illness or unemployment. Others might invest their money in a sibling's trade or a parent's farm. For young servants, saving was often tied to future aspirations: a dowry, an apprenticeship, or setting up a small household of their own. Yet for every servant who saved, there were others who fell into debt or worse. If caught stealing, a servant could expect harsh consequences. Punishments varied: a stern lecture, wage deductions, or dismissal in minor cases, whipping, public shaming, or even hanging in more serious ones. In towns, petty thefts could result in time spent in the stocks or local jail. In large households, a theft might be hushed up to avoid scandal, especially if it reflected poorly on the employer's ability to manage staff. What makes these economic dynamics particularly telling is the degree to which they mirrored the broader Tudor society, one of inequality, scarcity, and negotiation. Just as nobles jockeyed for royal favor and merchants hedged their ventures, so too did servants use every available means to get by and get ahead. Some prospered, moving from footboy to steward or marrying into modest comfort, while others struggled for every mouthful of bread. Moreover, the fluidity of servant roles, between official duties and personal hustle, between loyalty and self-preservation, reflected the blurring of boundaries common in the early modern world. The household was not merely a place of work, but also of survival and community. A maid who saved the leftover pastry flour was not just being resourceful. She was adapting to a system that offered little security. Servants often supported family members with their earnings. Some sent part of their wages home to aging parents or siblings, while others used connections formed in the household to help relatives find work. In this way, the servants' economy was never isolated, but embedded in a larger network of kinship and obligation. In some cases, siblings or even entire families worked in the same household or estate, building tiny dynasties within the servant class. Additionally, the moral judgment around money and theft was highly contextual. A servant stealing a pound of sugar might be condemned as a thief in one household, but pitted as a hungry soul in another. The ambiguity of these acts, between need and greed, cunning and desperation, highlights the emotional and ethical complexity of Tudor service life. Employers, too, had a role in shaping these dynamics. A generous master could inspire fierce loyalty and discourage dishonesty, while a cruel or miserly one might foster resentment and theft. Religion also influenced how money and possessions were understood. Christian teachings emphasized charity, honesty, and humility, values that often conflicted with the practical demands of daily survival. Yet, even in pious households, moral lapses were quietly overlooked if the offending servant was otherwise valuable or if public scandal could be avoided. Material inequality, meanwhile, was impossible to ignore. A servant polishing silverware or setting a lavish table might never taste the delicacies served. Watching such wealth pass daily through one's hands without ever possessing it must have been a constant reminder of one's place in the social order. And yet, this proximity to luxury also served as a kind of education. Many servants learned about trade goods, fashion, etiquette, and investment simply through observation, a knowledge base that might prove useful if they ever found themselves in better circumstances. For some, especially those in large urban households or court settings, the circulation of money, tips, and favors could evolve into a full-fledged economy of influence. Access to a powerful patron or the trust of a high-ranking servant could yield not just gifts and wages, but future employment, introductions, or even property. In these cases, the servant was not merely surviving, but actively leveraging the resources at hand to build a future. Eventually, the financial life of Tudor servants was not just about income. It was a web of transactions, both monetary and social, woven into the fabric of everyday existence. Every candle stub hoarded, every coin gifted, every scrap of fabric traded spoke to a constant struggle to maintain dignity and agency in a system designed to keep them humble. Their resourcefulness, discretion, and endurance were not just survival tactics. They were acts of quiet resistance, testaments to the human will to find meaning and stability in even the most uncertain of lives. In the Tudor period, the lives of servants were often marked by hard labor, limited freedom, and a strict social hierarchy that confined them to lowly positions. Yet, beneath the surface of this rigid social structure lay possibilities for upward mobility and advancement, avenues through which some servants could transcend their humble origins and achieve greater status, wealth, or influence. These paths were neither easy nor guaranteed, but depended on a mixture of personal ability, opportunity, patronage, and sometimes sheer luck. The roles of steward, agent, or trusted advisor, strategic marriages, and royal favor all played significant roles in enabling a servant to climb the social ladder during this transformative era. One of the most significant routes to advancement within the servant class was the attainment of positions of responsibility, such as steward or agent. These roles were crucial within noble or gentry households and carried not only greater duties, but also increased prestige and often better financial rewards. The steward was essentially the household manager, overseeing the day-to-day running of the estate, managing accounts, supervising other servants, and liaising with tenants and suppliers. Because of this oversight role, a steward was frequently in direct contact with the landowner or head of the household, making them a vital figure in the operation of the estate. To become a steward required a combination of literacy, numeracy, discretion, and practical experience. Many stewards started as lower-ranking servants, footmen, clerks, or even kitchen staff, but through apprenticeships, patronage, or the favor of an employer, they acquired the skills needed to manage complex household and financial affairs. Their knowledge of accounts, law, and local networks made them indispensable, and in some cases, this elevated status allowed them to accumulate wealth and influence. Some stewards became so trusted that they acted as agents on behalf of their employers, negotiating land sales, collecting rents, or representing their masters at local courts. Beyond their official duties, trusted stewards and agents often played roles that blurred the lines between service and partnership. Their intimate knowledge of household affairs and local politics meant they could influence decisions and shape estate management. This closeness to power sometimes allowed them to acquire property of their own, either through purchase or by marriage, signaling a tangible rise in social standing. Their ability to navigate the complex social webs of Tudor society was key to their success, demonstrating how competence combined with loyalty could. Marriage was another crucial avenue for upward mobility among servants. While marriage within one social station was common, strategic unions could enable servants or their children to rise into the ranks of the yeomanry or minor gentry. Marriage was not simply a private affair, but a deeply social and economic contract, with dowries, inheritance, and family alliances playing important roles. A servant's connection to a wealthy or influential household could open doors to advantageous matches, especially when the servant had proven trustworthy or gained skills and respect. For female servants, marriage was often the most direct means of improving their social and economic condition. A lady's maid or housekeeper who married well could gain access to property, social status, and a more comfortable life. Conversely, for men in service, marrying into a tradesman's family or a yeoman household could provide stability and the means to acquire land or start a business. Marriage also served as a way to consolidate the networks built within service. Family connections, patronage, and community ties all played a role. However, marriage into higher social strata was not without challenges. Social prejudices persisted, and upwardly mobile servants had to navigate the complexities of acceptance by their new families and communities. Sometimes, such marriages required official permissions or the intervention of patrons. Yet, the fact that these marriages occurred at all points to the fluidity present within Tudor society, where merit, skill, and connections could, on occasion, overcome rigid birthright. Royal favor represented perhaps the most glamorous and potentially transformative form of patronage for servants seeking upward mobility. Serving in royal households, whether as a groom, valet, steward, or secretary, placed individuals close to the crown's power and influence. The Tudor monarchs, especially Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, were known for rewarding loyal servants with pensions, grants of land, or official appointments. Such royal favors could elevate a servant's family for generations. A pension provided a steady income independent of day-to-day labor, granting financial security and social recognition. Grants of land or offices could transform a servant into a minor landowner or official, blurring the lines between servant and gentleman. Royal favor was often secured through a combination of service, loyalty, and sometimes political skill, including the ability to navigate court intrigue and gain influential allies. The granting of pensions or gifts was not merely a matter of generosity, but also a strategic act by the monarch to secure loyalty and manage court politics. Recipients of royal favor were often expected to use their elevated status to support the crown's interests in their localities or at court. This patronage system extended beyond the monarch to include powerful nobles and courtiers who could sponsor promising servants, creating a network of reciprocal obligations. Yet, despite these possibilities, upward mobility for Tudor servants remained exceptional rather than the norm. Most remained confined to their stations, constrained by social prejudice, limited education, and economic hardship. The routes to advancement demanded not only ability and luck, but also access to patronage networks, which could be difficult to obtain for those without connections or fortune. For many, the servant's life was a cycle of service, with limited hope of change. Nonetheless, the stories of those who succeeded reveal much about the fluidity and complexity of Tudor society. They challenge the notion of a completely rigid class system and highlight the interplay between social structures and individual agency. The servants who became stewards, agents, or trusted advisors demonstrate how knowledge and trust could translate into power. Those who married into higher ranks show how personal relationships could circumvent social barriers. And those who gained royal favor illustrate the importance of political acumen and loyalty in securing status. In examining these pathways, it is also important to recognize the role of education and self-improvement. Literacy, numeracy, and familiarity with legal and financial matters were crucial skills that could transform a servant's prospects. Some servants attended parish schools or received informal training within households, enabling them to take on more complex roles. This investment in skills was a form of social capital, facilitating entry into roles beyond menial labor. Furthermore, the concept of patronage was not just top-down but involved mutual benefit. Servants who gained favor often supported their patrons by managing estates effectively, enforcing their interests, or acting as intermediaries. This reciprocal relationship created a system in which advancement was tied to loyalty and service, but also to competence and trustworthiness. The patronage system was a defining feature of Tudor political and social life, extending from the royal court to local communities. For servants, it was both a lifeline and a challenge, offering opportunities for advancement but requiring navigation of complex social webs. Success in this system depended on character, skill, timing, and sometimes the ability to cultivate influential advocates. Upward mobility and patronage in Tudor England reveal a nuanced picture of service and social structure. While the majority of servants lived and died within limited circumstances, a minority managed to leverage their positions into greater influence and comfort. Becoming a steward, agent, or trusted advisor was a significant step that demanded education and discretion but could change one's life trajectory. Marrying into higher social stations was another powerful tool for social advancement, though not without its obstacles. Finally, royal favor and pensions represented the pinnacle of servant advancement, providing security, status, and political clout. These pathways illuminate the tension in Tudor society between hierarchy and mobility, between tradition and change. They show how servants were not merely passive actors, but engaged participants in the social, economic, and political life of their time. Their stories of advancement provide insight into the possibilities and limitations of early modern England, offering a richer understanding of a society in transition. The Tudor era, stretching from 1485 to 1603, was a time of great political intrigue, social upheaval, and stark divisions in society. While much historical focus tends to highlight the nobility, royalty, and key political figures, the lives of servants, those often overlooked individuals working quietly in the background, were also entwined with the era's turbulence. Their experiences, especially in relation to crime, rebellion, and scandal, reveal the precariousness and complexity of daily life in early modern England. At the same time, servants faced many physical hardships. Illness, injury, and death shaped their existence, highlighting both the harshness of their conditions and the limits of contemporary medical knowledge. Exploring these themes illuminates the often hidden dramas of Tudor servants and their vital role in the fabric of society. In Tudor England, servants were not mere passive bystanders to the grand political events unfolding around them. Their close proximity to power, whether in royal courts, noble households, or urban establishments, sometimes drew them into conspiracies and court intrigues. While many servants performed their duties without incident, some found themselves caught up in plots that could alter the course of history, or at least their own lives. Court intrigues were a constant feature of the Tudor monarchy, where alliances shifted rapidly and the stakes were often life and death. Servants who worked closely with influential courtiers or members of the royal family could become valuable informants or unwitting pawns in political schemes. Some acted as messengers carrying secret letters. Others served as spies reporting on rival factions. Their intimate knowledge of household routines, personal habits, and confidences gave them unique access to sensitive information. This made them both useful and dangerous to those in power. The risk of involvement in conspiracies could bring severe consequences. Accusations of treason or complicity in plots could lead to imprisonment, torture, or execution. Even association with scandalous figures could damage a servant's reputation or livelihood. For example, a servant's loyalty was frequently tested during events such as the Pilgrimage of Grace, 1536, a major northern uprising against Henry VIII's religious reforms. Some servants may have sympathized with rebels or passed information to them, while others maintained strict allegiance to their masters. In either case, the delicate balance of trust could be shattered by suspicion or betrayal. Theft was another common form of crime among servants, reflecting both the temptations and the hardships of their lives. While many servants were honest and hardworking, economic pressures and the constant proximity to valuable goods created opportunities for petty theft and pilfering. Theft ranged from stealing small items like food scraps, coins, or clothing, to more serious acts involving silverware, spices, or even livestock. Blackmail was a related but more insidious crime. Servants with knowledge of their employer's secrets, whether about illicit relationships, financial dealings, or political opinions, could threaten to reveal damaging information unless paid off. Such coercion could occur within households or between rival factions at court. The threat of exposure was particularly potent in an era where reputation was paramount, and accusations of disloyalty or immorality could ruin careers or lead to arrest. Espionage, often overlapping with theft and blackmail, was another dark aspect of servant life. Some servants worked as spies for foreign powers or domestic rivals, exploiting their positions to gather intelligence. The Tudor period, especially under Elizabeth I, was rife with fears of Catholic plots and foreign invasions, making espionage a highly sensitive and dangerous activity. Servants could be recruited or coerced into these roles, placing them at great personal risk. Several famous scandals involving court servants have survived in historical records, illustrating the fraught nature of their existence. One notable example is the case of Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, whose household staff were implicated in various intrigues and rumors. Servants' testimonies were often used in investigations, highlighting their roles as both witnesses and participants in courtly drama. Another scandal involved the fall of Robert Dudley's servant, who was accused of spying and plotting against powerful figures. These episodes show how servants could become entangled in political battles, sometimes deliberately, sometimes unwittingly. Beyond the political and criminal aspects, the daily reality of Tudor servants was often marked by physical suffering. Illness was common due to poor diet, inadequate shelter, and the demanding nature of their work. Common ailments included respiratory infections, digestive problems, skin diseases, and rheumatism. The lack of sanitation and clean water further exacerbated health issues. Medical treatment in the Tudor period was rudimentary by modern standards. Remedies combined traditional herbal knowledge, superstition, and early medical theories based on the balance of humors. Servants might seek help from local herbalists, apothecaries, or the household physician if one was available. Treatments could include bloodletting, poultices, or herbal infusions, but their effectiveness was limited. Many ailments went untreated or worsened due to delayed care or lack of resources. Work-related injuries were frequent and sometimes severe. Servants engaged in kitchen work risked burns and cuts, while those working with horses or heavy equipment faced bruises, fractures, or worse. Stabling horses was a dangerous task, as horses could be unpredictable and strong. Carrying heavy loads, fetching water, and working long hours without proper rest also contributed to chronic pain and fatigue. When injuries or illnesses struck, remedies were often improvised. Household staff might use salves made from common kitchen ingredients or rely on folk remedies passed down through generations. Pain relief was minimal, and recovery depended largely on the individual's resilience and the severity of the condition. Some households kept simple medical manuals or records of effective treatments, which were shared among servants. Death was an ever-present reality for Tudor servants, whose life expectancy was shorter than that of the gentry or nobility. Harsh living conditions, poor nutrition, and exposure to diseases made early death common. When a servant died, the rituals surrounding their passing reflected their social status and the beliefs of the time. Funeral practices for servants were modest compared to those for their employers. Burial often took place in the parish churchyard, sometimes in communal or unmarked graves. The quality of the coffin, the attendance at the funeral, and the type of ceremony varied, depending on the servant's relationship with their household and community. In some cases, servants received small sums or goods from their employers to cover funeral expenses, particularly if they had served loyally for many years. Religion played a significant role in death rituals. The Tudor period was one of religious transformation, moving from Catholicism under Henry VIII to Protestantism under Elizabeth I, which affected funerary customs. Prayers for the dead, masses, and the use of religious symbols were common, reflecting beliefs about the afterlife and the importance of a Christian burial. Servants often participated in church services and relied on the community for support during bereavement. Despite the hardships, the death of a servant could have ripple effects within the household and the broader community. The loss of an experienced cook, a trusted groom, or a skilled housekeeper could disrupt daily routines and impose additional burdens on others. Servants often formed close-knit communities within households, and the death of one was mourned both personally and practically. The lives of Tudor servants were marked by a constant interplay between survival and vulnerability. Their involvement in crime, rebellion, and scandal reveals how their positions brought both opportunity and danger, especially in the politically charged atmosphere of the time. Simultaneously, the physical realities of illness, injury, and death underscore the precariousness of their existence. These aspects of servant life highlight the complexity of Tudor society and the resilience of those who lived within it, navigating a world defined by power, risk, and endurance. The lives of Tudor servants, though often overshadowed by the grandeur of kings, queens, and nobles, have left traces across a variety of historical sources that provide valuable insights into their experiences, challenges, and social realities. These traces, household accounts, wills, letters, parish records, tax rolls, and legal documents, form the foundation for historians seeking to reconstruct the daily lives and wider significance of this essential yet frequently invisible class. Understanding how these records were created, preserved, and interpreted is crucial to appreciating the complexities of servant life in early modern England. Household accounts are among the richest sources for studying servants. These detailed financial records often include wages paid, purchases made for the household, inventories of goods, and notes on the duties or behaviors of servants. Accounts from royal and noble households can be particularly revealing because of their scale and meticulousness. They show not only the numbers and types of servants employed, but also shed light on the social hierarchy within the household, the material conditions of service, and even personal relationships. For example, accounts might record expenses for servants' clothing or fines levied for misconduct, providing glimpses into their status and discipline. Wills and probate records are another important resource. They can reveal the property and possessions servants accumulated, their family relationships, and their social networks. Wills sometimes mention gifts or legacies left to servants by their masters or vice versa, illustrating the bonds of loyalty or gratitude that could develop. The presence or absence of servants in such documents also offers clues about their wealth or standing at death. Letters exchanged between servants and their employers or among servants themselves provide personal voices and reveal emotional dimensions, concerns over employment, health, family, or hopes for advancement. Parish records, including baptism, marriage, and burial registers, contribute to understanding servants' family life and community ties. These documents help map out servant origins, movements, and life cycles. Coupled with tax rolls, which indicate household compositions and sometimes occupations, they shed light on the socioeconomic status of servants and their households. Legal documents such as court records or disputes involving servants provide evidence of conflicts, criminal accusations, or contracts, revealing the legal framework within which servants operated and their vulnerabilities in society. Historians piece together these diverse records to create a composite picture of servant life. This process, however, is complicated by the fragmentary nature of the evidence and the biases embedded in historical sources, which often focus on elite perspectives. Servants themselves rarely left extensive written records, and when they appear, it is frequently through the eyes of their employers or officials. To overcome these challenges, historians employ interdisciplinary approaches, combining archival research with archaeological findings, material culture studies, and social theory. One important method is microhistory, which zooms in on individual households or communities to explore everyday life in granular detail. By examining one household's accounts alongside parish records, letters, and legal documents, researchers can reconstruct the rhythms, struggles, and interactions of servants. This approach humanizes servants, moving beyond stereotypes or statistical generalizations, and highlights their agency within constrained circumstances. In addition to archival sources, literary and dramatic representations offer a different, though more stylized, window into servant life in Tudor England. The period's literature and theater often featured servants as characters, clowns, fools, maids, and footmen, who both entertained and reflected social realities. Shakespeare, for example, created memorable servant characters such as the witty clowns in his comedies, or the clever maids who used their intelligence to influence events. These figures provided audiences with humor, but also commented on social hierarchies and human nature. Ballads, chapbooks, and satirical works were widely popular and frequently included stories or songs about servants. These genres could portray servants sympathetically, mockingly, or as cunning tricksters, reflecting popular attitudes and anxieties. Such portrayals often amplified or distorted servant characteristics for dramatic effect, creating archetypes that differed from real-life complexities. The difference between fictional portrayals and actual servant life is important to recognize. While literature and drama reveal cultural perceptions and social commentary, they often exaggerate traits or focus on exceptional cases. Real servants faced harsher economic realities, fewer freedoms, and more constraints than their fictional counterparts. However, these cultural products also demonstrate how servants were integral to the social imagination and reveal the dynamics of power, class, and identity in Tudor society. Despite the wealth of historical and literary sources, servants have often been marginalized in historical narratives. This omission reflects broader patterns of historical amnesia and class bias, where the lives of lower-status individuals were overlooked or deemed less worthy of study. The focus on monarchs, nobility, and political elites meant that servants, who made up a significant portion of the population, were relegated to footnotes or invisible background figures. In recent decades, however, there has been a growing recognition of the importance of history from below, a historiographical approach that centers on ordinary people's experiences rather than elite actors. This shift has encouraged more nuanced and inclusive studies of servants, exploring their social roles, labor, family life, and contributions to early modern society. Microhistory and social history have been key methodologies driving this change. Modern Tudor exhibitions and documentaries have also begun to highlight servants' lives, bringing them into public consciousness. Museums and historical sites increasingly incorporate the stories of servants to provide a fuller picture of Tudor households and society. These presentations often use reconstructions, artifacts, and interactive experiences to convey the daily realities of service, helping visitors understand the human dimension behind the grand historical narratives. This renewed interest has prompted debates about how best to represent servants and avoid romanticizing or stereotyping them. Scholars and curators strive to balance the harshness of servant life with their resilience, agency, and complexity. They also explore intersections of gender, class, and race, recognizing that servant experiences were not massive. The study of Tudor servants in the historical record, literature, and modern memory reveals the layered ways in which their lives have been documented, imagined, and remembered. Archival research uncovers the material and social conditions of service, while literary and dramatic portrayals reflect cultural attitudes and social dynamics. Efforts to remember and represent servants today challenge historical neglect and invite a deeper understanding of the past grounded in the experiences of all social groups. Through these multiple perspectives, the hidden lives of Tudor servants come into clearer focus, enriching our knowledge of early modern England and the enduring complexities of social history. The story of Tudor servants is one that has long been overshadowed by tales of monarchs, nobles, and grand political events, yet it holds profound significance for understanding early modern England in all its complexity. Throughout the Tudor period, servants occupied a paradoxical position. They were essential to the functioning of households and courts, yet they remained largely invisible in historical records and popular imagination. Exploring their lives sheds light on broader themes of visibility, power, and resilience, revealing not only the mechanics of daily life, but also the deep social structures that define the era. One of the most striking aspects of Tudor servants is their invisibility, despite their indispensability. They were the people who prepared the food, maintained clothing, cleaned the estates, cared for animals, and ensured that the grand households operated smoothly. Without their labor, the display of wealth and power that characterized Tudor nobility would have been impossible. Yet, servants themselves were often hidden from view, both physically in the shadows of the great halls and metaphorically in the historical narratives dominated by their social superiors. This invisibility extended to many aspects of their existence. Their voices were rarely recorded, their personal experiences often went undocumented, and their contributions minimized. Despite this, the lives of Tudor servants provide an invaluable window into the social realities of the time. Their experiences reflect the rigid hierarchies and intricate social codes that governed early modern England. Servants navigated a world of strict rules and expectations, where obedience and loyalty were demanded, but where patronage and favor could also offer rare opportunities for advancement. This delicate balance between constraint and agency underscores the complex dynamics of power at play within households and beyond. The power relations within the servant class itself were layered and nuanced. There was a clear hierarchy among servants, with roles ranging from the lowliest kitchen maid to the influential steward who managed household affairs. This internal stratification mirrored the broader social order and highlights how status and privilege operated on multiple levels. Promotion and patronage could transform a servant's life, allowing movement from menial labor to trusted positions, sometimes even enabling marriages into higher social classes. Such upward mobility, though limited and exceptional, challenges the notion of servants as wholly powerless or passive. Moreover, the resilience of Tudor servants emerges as a central theme. Their daily lives were demanding, marked by long hours, physical toil, low wages, and precarious living conditions. They faced dangers from illness, injury, and even legal penalties. Yet, servants demonstrated remarkable endurance, resourcefulness, and adaptability. They forged communities, engaged in barter and moonlighting to supplement their incomes, and found ways to negotiate their positions within the household hierarchy. Their social networks, within the household and through wider parish or urban communities, provided vital support systems. Such resilience speaks to the human spirit's capacity to survive and even thrive amid adversity. Studying Tudor servants also reveals much about the broader social, economic, and cultural fabric of early modern England. The servant class was a microcosm of the period's social stratification, economic conditions, and gender roles. For example, the gendered division of labor within service reflected wider societal expectations, with women typically handling domestic tasks like cooking and laundry, and men managing stables, hunting, or security. These roles both reinforced and were shaped by contemporary ideas about gender and work. The economic realities of service work illuminate early capitalist dynamics and labor relations before the Industrial Revolution. Servants were part of a labor force increasingly monetized through wages, tips, and allowances, yet their work was embedded in a system of personal relationships, loyalty, and obligation. The tension between economic necessity and social ties provides insight into the evolving nature of labor and social contract during the Tudor era. Furthermore, the interactions between servants and their employers reveal much about the exercise of power and control in early modern households. Households were not only private domestic spaces, but also centers of economic activity and social governance. The rules governing servant behavior, the disciplinary mechanisms in place, and the negotiation of privileges all illustrate how authority was maintained and contested on a daily basis. In this sense, studying servants enhances our understanding of power beyond formal political structures, highlighting its operation in intimate and practical contexts. The legacy of Tudor servants resonates in contemporary understandings of labor and social class. Their experiences underscore the long history of domestic and service work as essential yet undervalued. The patterns of invisibility, exploitation, and resilience seen in Tudor servants echo into modern discussions about workers' rights, gendered labor, and class inequality. Recognizing the importance of historical service labor challenges us to reconsider assumptions about the value and dignity of all work, especially that which is often hidden or marginalized. Moreover, revisiting the lives of Tudor servants contributes to a more inclusive and democratic approach to history itself. It emphasizes the importance of history from below, where ordinary people's stories enrich and complicate our narratives. By recovering the voices and experiences of servants, historians acknowledge that society is made up not just of rulers and elites, but also of those who labored behind the scenes, people whose daily struggles and triumphs shaped the social world. This perspective encourages a more empathetic and nuanced view of the past, one that recognizes complexity rather than reducing history to grand events or famous figures alone. It also invites reflection on our present, urging us to consider who remains invisible today and how their stories might be brought to light. In due course, the hidden lives of Tudor servants matter today because they remind us that history is not just about power and prestige, but also about the human experiences that sustain communities and societies. Their stories reveal resilience in the face of hardship, the negotiation of identity within rigid hierarchies, and the constant interplay of visibility and invisibility that shapes social life. By studying these lives, we deepen our understanding of the past and enrich our appreciation of the diverse contributions that have made human history. The significance of Tudor servants lies in what they reveal about early modern England's social fabric and the enduring human qualities of perseverance and adaptation. Their invisibility in history challenges us to look closer, question assumptions, and value the often overlooked labor that supports society. The legacy of their experiences continues to resonate in contemporary debates about class, labor, and social justice, making the exploration of their hidden lives not just an academic exercise, but a vital part of understanding who we are and how we live together.